In the quiet town of Shreveport, Louisiana, a seemingly ordinary evening at a church fellowship hall turned into an unforgettable moment of connection and introspection. It was a town hall event, with local families, retirees, and curious residents gathered to hear the guest speaker Donald Trump. Among the audience was a young girl named Emily, just 9 years old, who clutched an old leather-bound Bible passed down from her late grandmother. Emily's presence was unassuming, yet her quiet determination carried a weight far beyond her years. As the evening unfolded, the crowd listened to Trump speak on policies and the future of the nation. The energy was familiar yet subdued, until Emily, with trembling hands and a voice that refused to waver, stepped forward to ask a question that would change the tone of the night entirely. "Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?" Her simple yet profound question silenced the room, drawing the attention of every person present. What followed was not a routine political response, but a deeply personal reflection from Trump on faith, loss, redemption, and purpose. Emily's courage to ask what many adults shy away from transformed the gathering into a heartfelt exploration of belief, resilience, and humanity. What does God mean to you? This single question became the catalyst for an evening of vulnerability and shared understanding, leaving many in tears and everyone deeply moved. In the heart of Shreveport, Louisiana, the church fellowship hall was alive with quiet anticipation. The usual hum of folding chairs and whispered conversations filled the air, but tonight, the space had taken on a unique energy. Typically reserved for Sunday potlucks and Bible study, the hall was now transformed into a venue for a town hall event. Its modest decor, polished wooden floors, soft fluorescent lighting, and simple pews seemed almost intimate, lending a sense of closeness to the gathering. At the front of the room stood Donald Trump, his larger-than-life presence somewhat tempered by the gravity of the occasion. While his trademark gestures and familiar orange complexion were unmistakable, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. The boisterous energy of his usual rallies was absent, replaced by a quieter, more contemplative tone as he addressed the audience. Families, retirees, and locals filled the seats, listening politely as Trump spoke about policies and his vision for America's future. In the midst of the crowd sat 8-year-old Emily, her petite frame dwarfed by the folding chair she occupied. Dressed in her best Sunday dress, she clutched a worn leather-bound Bible tightly to her chest, a cherished heirloom passed down from her late grandmother. Her mother, seated beside her, leaned over and whispered, "You can ask him, but only if you're brave enough." Emily nodded, her heart pounding. For weeks she had rehearsed her question, scribbling it in the margins of her school notebook and murmuring it softly before bed. It wasn't born of childish curiosity, but a deep, soulful yearning to understand something greater. As Trump continued, the floor eventually opened for questions. A line quickly formed, filled with adults eager to ask about local concerns, national policies, and even to offer light-hearted compliments about his iconic red tie. Emily hesitated, her small hands gripping the edges of her Bible, until her knuckles turned white. Her mother nudged her gently, a gesture of encouragement that sent a surge of resolve through the little girl. She rose from her seat, her legs wobbly as she made her way to the line. The room began to notice her, a small figure among towering adults, clutching her oversized Bible as though it were a shield. Whispers rippled through the crowd, curiosity mounting. As the line inched forward, Emily's heart raced, but she refused to retreat. When her turn came, she stepped to the microphone, her presence capturing the attention of everyone in the hall. Trump's gaze softened as he looked at her, his usual confidence momentarily replaced with something warmer. "What's your question, young lady?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Emily swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Her voice trembled but didn't falter as she asked the question she had carried in her heart for so long. "Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?" The room fell silent, the crowd collectively holding its breath. Emily's courage to speak, her sincerity, and her vulnerability created a palpable tension, drawing everyone into the moment. What had begun as a routine town hall now felt like something far more significant, a moment of truth, vulnerability, and shared humanity. Emily stepped up to the microphone, her small frame barely visible behind the podium. The room, filled with adults discussing politics and policies just moments earlier, suddenly seemed larger, quieter. The murmurs faded, and all eyes turned toward the 8-year-old girl clutching a weathered Bible to her chest. She hesitated for a brief moment, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges of the sacred book. Then, with a deep breath, she found her voice a voice that trembled but refused to break. "Mr. Trump," she began, her words delicate yet firm, "what does God mean to you?" The question hung in the air, echoing in the sudden and absolute silence. Conversations halted mid-sentence, and even the faint creak of a chair seemed deafening in the absence of sound. It was as if the entire room collectively held its breath, struck by the weight of such a profound question coming from such a young child. This wasn't a question about policy or politics, it was a question of the heart, one that demanded vulnerability. Donald Trump, known for his rapid-fire responses and unshakable confidence, stood still. His usual commanding demeanor softened, and his expression shifted to one of quiet introspection. He looked at Emily for a long moment, his gaze falling briefly to the worn Bible she held tightly. Something about her presence, her sincerity, seemed to pierce through the layers of bravado that typically defined him. "That's a big question," he said at last, his voice lower and steadier than usual. He paused, seemingly searching for the right words, a rare occurrence for a man who always seemed to have an answer. The audience remained frozen, their eyes darting between Emily and Trump, captivated by the uncharacteristic vulnerability unfolding before them. The pause stretched on, but it wasn't empty. The silence felt alive, charged with the collective anticipation of the room. Trump's typical quick-witted replies were nowhere to be found, replaced instead by a contemplative stillness. He leaned slightly on the podium, his hand resting on its edge, his fingers tapping lightly as if to steady himself. "I've thought about that question a lot," he admitted, his tone quiet but firm. "But I'll be honest, it's not one I've always had the answer to." The admission was startling. This was a man whose career had been built on projecting strength and certainty, yet here he was, opening up in a way no one expected. His words carried an emotional weight that seemed to pull the room even deeper into the moment. Trump glanced back at Emily, his gaze softening further. "When I was about your age," he began, his voice tinged with a rare note of nostalgia, "I had a lot of questions about God, too. My parents took me to church every Sunday, and I remember sitting in those pews, staring at the stained glass windows, wondering if God was even listening to me." His confession drew murmurs from the crowd, many of whom had never seen this side of him. The polished rhetoric and bold proclamations of a politician were gone, replaced by the heartfelt reflections of a man who had wrestled with the same doubts and fears as everyone else. Trump continued, sharing a story from his childhood about his father's wisdom. "My dad used to tell me that faith is like a ladder, you climb it one step at a time. Sometimes you're afraid you'll fall, but you keep climbing because there's something up there worth reaching for." As he spoke, Emily's grip on her Bible loosened slightly, her young face a mix of curiosity and awe. The rest of the audience leaned in, their expressions mirroring her own. Trump's voice grew steadier, more assured as he delved deeper into his journey of faith, sharing moments of loss, anger, and eventual understanding. "There were times in my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "when I thought God had given up on me. I faced failures, losses, and moments where I didn't think I could keep going. But looking back, I realized that faith isn't about always having the answers. It's about believing that, even when you don't see the whole picture, there's a purpose, a reason to keep climbing." Trump's words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone in the room. Emily's eyes shimmered, tears threatening to spill as she absorbed the weight of his response. The crowd, too, seemed transformed, their initial curiosity about the question giving way to a shared sense of introspection and connection. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. It was profound, a shared moment of vulnerability and understanding that had transcended politics and differences. Emily stood taller, her trembling hands steady now as she looked up at Trump, her wide eyes reflecting the gratitude and hope that his words had given her. Trump took a deep breath, his gaze lingering on Emily and the Bible she clutched so tightly. His voice softened as he began to speak, his words carrying an unexpected intimacy. "When I was about your age," he started, "I used to sit in church every Sunday. My parents were very dedicated to their faith, and they made sure I was there with them, sitting in those hard wooden pews. I remember staring up at the stained glass windows, watching the sunlight pour through them. They were beautiful. But as a kid, I didn't always understand what they meant. I wondered if God was listening to me or if he was even real. It's a big question for a young boy or for anyone, really. The crowd was silent, captivated by this rare glimpse into Trump's childhood. It was a side of him they weren't accustomed to, a thoughtful, reflective side that stood in stark contrast to the brash persona they often saw. My dad, Trump continued, was a wise man. He didn't always have a lot of words, but the ones he chose stuck with me. He used to tell me that faith is like a ladder. You climb it one step at a time, he'd say. Sometimes you're afraid you'll fall. Sometimes it feels like the ladder will break. But you keep climbing, because there's something up there worth reaching for. At the time, I thought it was just something he said to keep me quiet. I didn't fully understand what he meant. A faint chuckle rippled through the audience, breaking the tension slightly. But Trump wasn't done. He leaned forward, his tone growing heavier. As I got older, life threw a lot of challenges my way. And I'll be honest, there were times when I didn't feel like God was with me. Times when I was angry, when I doubted, when I thought maybe he'd given up on me altogether. One of those moments was when I lost my brother Fred. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Trump's voice faltered for a brief moment before he cleared his throat and pressed on. Fred was one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever known. He had a light about him, a goodness that I couldn't always understand. But Fred had his struggles, his demons, and no matter how much my family and I tried to help him, it wasn't enough. When he passed away, it was like the world stopped. I was angry at him, at myself, and at God. I kept asking why. Why would God take someone like Fred and leave me behind? Trump paused, his hand gripping the edge of the podium as he gathered his thoughts. The crowd was utterly still, their expressions a mix of empathy and intrigue. For a man so rarely vulnerable in public, this moment felt profound, almost sacred. For a long time after that, he continued, I turned away from faith. I thought, if God was real, why would he let something like this happen? Why would he take someone so good and leave me to carry that weight? His words were raw, unpolished, and deeply human. Emily's wide eyes shimmered with tears, and throughout the room, people shifted uncomfortably, as though grappling with their own memories of loss and doubt. But then Trump said, his voice softening again, something changed. I don't know if it was a dream or just a memory, but one night I saw Fred's face. He was smiling, that big, goofy smile he used to have. And I heard him say, don't be angry, Don. You've got work to do. Trump's voice grew steadier as he went on, a quiet resolve taking hold. In that moment, I realized something. Faith isn't about understanding everything. It's not about having all the answers. It's about trusting that, even when you can't see the whole picture, there's a purpose. A reason for the pain, the struggles, and the losses. And maybe, just maybe, Fred's purpose was to teach me that. The room remained silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. Emily, still clutching her Bible, seemed transfixed, her tears now held back by a quiet determination. Around her, adults sat motionless, some dabbing their eyes with tissues, others simply staring at Trump, lost in their own thoughts. Trump's gaze returned to Emily. So when you ask me what God means to me, I'll say this: he's the reason I keep climbing that ladder, even when it's hard. He's the reminder that we're here for more than just ourselves. And he's the one who gives us hope, even in the darkest times. Emily's grip on her Bible loosened slightly, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed her face. The crowd, too, seemed to exhale, their initial curiosity about Trump's faith now replaced by a deeper sense of connection. What had started as a simple question from a little girl had become a shared reflection on life's challenges, faith, and the resilience of the human spirit. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was not awkward but profound, a collective acknowledgement of the truth and vulnerability that had just been shared. It wasn't a political speech or a rehearsed line. It was real, and it resonated with everyone in the room. The audience, captivated by Trump's story, sat in awe, their emotional engagement palpable. Emily's courage had brought them to this moment, and Trump's willingness to share his own struggles had made it unforgettable. In that modest church hall, surrounded by strangers, Faith had become a bridge connecting hearts and minds in a way no one could have anticipated. As Donald Trump's words settled into the quiet of the church fellowship hall, all eyes turned to Emily. The 8-year-old girl stood at the microphone, her small frame dwarfed by the podium and the weight of the moment. Her wide eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and her trembling hands held the worn Bible she had clutched so tightly throughout the evening. But there was something more, a quiet resolve in her posture, a sense of strength born from hearing the heartfelt response to her profound question. A single tear slipped down Emily's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as though she was absorbing the weight of Trump's words. The man who had just shared a deeply personal story of loss, faith, and redemption looked at her with a softness that few had seen before. "What's your name?" Trump asked gently, his tone uncharacteristically tender. "Emily," she whispered, her voice steady despite the emotion etched across her face. "That's a beautiful name," Trump replied, a faint smile crossing his face. "Emily, you've shown more courage tonight than most people twice your age. Don't ever lose that." Emily's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, and she nodded, her tears now replaced by a quiet pride. She extended her small hand to him, and he shook it firmly yet gently, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of mutual respect and gratitude. Around the room, the crowd watched in rapt attention. The moment felt larger than the two people standing at the microphone. It was as if Emily's courage and Trump's vulnerability had unlocked something within each person present. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a mix of admiration and deep introspection. Then, from the back of the room, a rugged man in his 40s slowly raised his hand. His face, lined with years of hard work, bore an expression of seriousness and thoughtfulness. A mechanic by trade, he had come to the town hall expecting discussions about local issues, not a spiritual reckoning. "Mr. Trump," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've spent years trying to figure out my own faith. Hearing you talk about anger, doubt, and hope, it makes me wonder if part of the problem is that we're all too afraid to admit we're struggling. Do you think that's why faith feels so hard sometimes?" Trump turned to face the man, his demeanor reflective. "You know," he said, leaning slightly on the podium, "I think a lot of us are afraid to admit we don't have it all together. Faith isn't about being perfect, it's about trying, even when it feels messy and uncertain. It's in those struggles that we find our strength." The man nodded, his expression softening as he sat back down. A murmur of agreement swept through the room, a shared acknowledgement of the vulnerability Trump had brought to the conversation. Next, an older woman with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun stood up, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I lost my husband last year," she said, her words thick with emotion. "I've been so angry at God ever since. I feel like I've lost my faith entirely. Do you think it's too late to find it again?" Trump stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his voice soft but steady. "It's never too late," he replied. "Faith isn't something you lose forever, it waits for you. Sometimes it's in the quietest moments, when you least expect it, that it finds its way back to you." The woman's tears flowed freely now, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She nodded, dabbing her cheeks with a tissue as a small smile broke through her sorrow. Emily's small voice broke the silence that followed. "My grandma used to say faith is like planting seeds," she said, her words clear and steady. "You don't always see them grow right away, but you have to believe they will." Trump turned back to her, his smile widening slightly. "Your grandma sounds like a very wise woman," he said. "And she's absolutely right. Faith is like a seed, it grows in ways we don't always see, but it's always there waiting." The room seemed to breathe collectively, the heaviness replaced by a sense of quiet connection. Emily's courage had sparked something profound, a willingness among the attendees to reflect on their own struggles, their own faith, and their own humanity. Strangers exchanged glances, some with tears in their eyes, others with soft smiles that hinted at newfound understanding. What had started as a structured town hall had transformed into a deeply personal exploration of life's challenges and the enduring strength of faith. And at the center of it all was Emily, a little girl whose brave question had opened a door no one had dared approach before. As the room began to settle, Donald Trump returned to the podium, his gaze sweeping over the crowd that had been moved to silence by the night's events. His voice, now softer but still commanding, carried a tone of heartfelt reflection. Tonight, he began, we've been reminded of something truly important. Faith isn't always found in grand gestures or dramatic moments, it often lives in the small things. A kind word, a helping hand, or a question as brave as Emily's can light a spark in someone's heart. These moments may seem simple, but they have the power to change lives. He paused, his expression thoughtful, before continuing. Faith also requires us to ask hard questions. Questions that make us uncomfortable, that force us to look inward and confront our fears, our doubts, and even our failures. But it's in those moments of uncertainty that we grow. We find strength not because we have all the answers, but because we're willing to seek them. Trump glanced at Emily, who was now sitting back in her seat, her grandmother's Bible still held close to her chest. And sometimes, he said, his voice filled with admiration, it takes the courage of someone like Emily to remind us what truly matters. Her question tonight wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. What does God mean to us? Who are we when no one else is looking? What do we stand for? The room was silent, the audience hanging on every word. Trump's tone grew firmer, more resolute. If tonight has taught us anything, it's that faith isn't about perfection or certainty. It's about believing in something greater than ourselves, even when the path is unclear. It's about holding on to hope and sharing it with those who need it most. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze meeting various members of the crowd. I want to challenge each of you to carry this message forward. Ask yourselves what faith means to you. Share it with your family, your friends, even strangers. And don't let the fear of not having all the answers stop you. Faith is a journey, not a destination. As Trump stepped back from the podium, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the typical raucous cheers of a political rally, but a softer, more heartfelt ovation, one filled with gratitude, respect, and a sense of shared connection. People turned to one another, exchanging smiles, handshakes, and even quiet conversations. Strangers who had arrived as mere attendees were now leaving as a community, bound together by a moment of profound vulnerability and reflection. Emily, still sitting with her mother, looked up with a quiet sense of pride. Her mother leaned over, whispering, "You made a difference tonight, sweetheart." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with the realization that her question had touched so many. As the hall slowly emptied, the atmosphere lingered a sense of hope, renewed faith, and the power of one brave question to transform not just a room but hearts and minds. The evening in the small church fellowship hall in Shreveport, Louisiana, was nothing short of extraordinary. A simple, heartfelt question from an 8-year-old girl named Emily opened the door to a night of profound vulnerability and transformation. Her courage to ask, "What does God mean to you?" sparked a conversation that transcended politics, touching the hearts of everyone present. Donald Trump's honest and emotional response revealed a deeply human side, one filled with stories of loss, redemption, and faith. The room, once filled with polite curiosity, became a space of shared introspection, where strangers found connection and hope. Emily's bravery and Trump's sincerity remind us all of the power of meaningful questions. They push us to look inward, to confront our beliefs, and to seek answers that may not always be easy. These moments, however small, can create ripples that transform not just our lives but the lives of those around us. Now, we invite you to reflect on your own faith and the questions that matter most to you. Share this story with someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content that inspires, challenges, and brings us closer together. Let's keep climbing the ladder of faith together.